Hello and welcome. I am Karen McGregor, creator of the Speaker Success Formula and the Rock to Stage speaking program for entrepreneurs. Today I want to share with you how to take your talk, that one powerful talk you use over and over again on stage, and turn it into a webinar. But before we launch into those tips, here's a great secret you'll want to keep in your back pocket. If you have a powerful talk that inspires, educates, and sells, you're well on your way to having a successful webinar. The number one reason your webinar is going to get you results is that you already have a proven talk that works. My students across Canada and the US have been thrilled to watch their talks transformed into webinars so that they can be both on stage and online. So, ready for the tips? Well, we'll start with a few presentation must-dos and then move into strategy to get you the best results possible. Here we go with a countdown, 10 to 1. Tip number 10. Voice matters even more in a webinar than a talk. You must have a captivating voice, so practice having more variation of pitch and emphasize certain words more. Be sure to vary your volume somewhat, but not as much as you do on stage since the volume control isn't as good. Pace is important. You want to vary it somewhat, but in a webinar, practice a pace that isn't too slow since attention span is short. Since you're not in front of them, you may lose them with a slower pace. Tip number 9. Stand up if at all possible. The energy that you have on stage is gone as soon as you sit down. Having your laptop with slides, someplace where you can stand up and bring that full energy of a speaker to a webinar is critical. It is a little more tricky to set up, but it can be done and it's so well worth it. Tip number 8. Have someone handle your technology requirements. This is a big one for me, and I've learned the hard way. Some people have no problem running both the webinar and the technology, which really isn't hard to learn, but it's just that it can be so distracting when you're switching slides, and especially if you have your camera on and want to maintain eye contact with your audience. Having someone else handle questions the listeners have or be part of the conversation via chat is really important. It's also vital for your sales, as you can have, some people who want to buy your product and have questions about it, but have to exit the webinar early. So there has to be a system in place and a strategy in place for that. Tip number 7, PowerPoint slides should have very little text and an engaging image. People respond more to story and metaphor than they do to a litany of facts, so vary up your PowerPoint slides to have some that are content heavy, but most that demonstrate only one well-supported idea. You need to change things up more on a webinar than you do on stage, so be sure that you don't spend too long on one image or one point. It's kind of like being on a radio interview. Answer the question in a way that shows your expertise, but doesn't get the audience saying, oh, get on with it. You're going to lose over half of your listeners if you do that on your webinar. Tip number 6, the problem presented in the webinar needs to be kept top of mind, and you need to remind people of the problem as you present the solutions. Why? Well, over half of your webinar attendees come into the webinar late. And if you're only offering the solution without repeating the problem, then they will not only enter late, but leave early. In our Rock the Stage speaking program, we always like to say, no problem, no talk. In this case, no problem, no webinar. Our brains are designed to thrive on improvement and overcoming challenge. So be sure to constantly engage people in this way. Tip number 5, give a gift for those who stay on until the end of the webinar. Have them connect with your company in order to receive the gift. Make it easy, and offer it after you've completed your webinar, almost at the very end, so people can decide whether they want to, sign up and have you as their mentor or buy your product. But remember to remind listeners of the gift early on in your webinar, as well as in your marketing of the webinar, because you don't need to go into great detail about the gift. You know, a little bit of mystery is always a great thing. Just make sure it's valuable and that it can be used immediately by your listeners, whether they buy from you or not. Tip number 4. If you have bonuses for your offer, I highly recommend that you announce that you offered bonuses throughout the remainder of the webinar. Remember, your potential clients may have to exit the call early. And if they believe there are some bonuses coming, they're going to stay on longer to see what those are. You see, the upside to speaking live is that people listen to your entire talk and offer. The challenge with a webinar is keeping people on long enough to get there. Another idea is to have a limiter for one or more of your bonuses. For the really great bonuses, you might have a time limiter, like for the next 15 minutes, I'm going to reward fast action takers by giving away this gift, and whatever the gift is. That's a fabulous way. And I highly recommend that you use it as soon as possible in your webinars. Tip number 3, create urgency. There are millions of webinars happening all over the world, but far fewer live events. So the urgency for people to say yes to your offer is much lower on a webinar than it is on stage. Be aware that on a webinar, little or no urgency means no sales. A time limiter is great for urgency, as I just mentioned, but you might also have a limited number of spots available for a private session with you or a product that you rarely offer as a bonus, as an example. Tip number 2, review your offer more than once. Remind people what they are getting with their investment. You don't need to do this on stage as much because they have an opportunity to talk to your staff and to you after your presentation, but they may not get that direct access on the webinar. People are also not as attentive on a webinar because they are surrounded by the distractions of daily life. So make sure to slow down slightly during the offer to be sure people understand what they are receiving. Tip number 1, build your brand by being yourself. Be real and authentic on the webinar. Laugh at your own jokes, lighten up, and laugh at yourself a little bit. You see, the listeners want to know that there's a human behind the screen. That's why more and more people are choosing to use the webcam feature, as people can see both your slides and your face, making for a more human experience. Also, be sure to tell your core story and other stories of clients. Stories also connect to your brand and help people to see you as a mentor, someone they can get to know, like, and trust. Thank you so much for investing your time today to learn these valuable tips. Please leave a comment below and a thumbs up if you enjoyed this. Let us know what you're going to do differently on your webinars as a result of watching this video. Until then, speak your truth, love your audience, and live your message today.